mean, I feel like I don't know if you can teach it, right? You can just share what you've come to know as truth, and the things that resonate. So I always joke with people when they like ask me for advice. I'm like, I hope any of that was useful, because sometimes we can only speak from the context of our lives, and sometimes it resonates and sometimes it may not. So I don't know if you can teach it, but I always try to hold a space that allow for people to be themselves. Because working with my friend and mentor Alandria Williams, he would always talk about it as being liberated space. Like, how can we create liberated space for these young people that would come to the Highlander Center for a 7-day camp around organizing and community activism? And so I try to teach it more that way, just by accepting people as they are, however they enter the space, and create kind of that transformative moment through them actually feeling like they're allowed to be themselves. Because before I was Alandria's intern, I actually was a participant in the Seeds of Fire program. And so that was really impactful for me, because I was like in that weird transitionary moment of not being in high school and waiting to start college. And I showed up, and there were queer youth who, had varying immigration statuses, but nobody was treated any different than, people. We treated them as people worthy of dignity, and that's what they did for us that year that I was allowed to be a participant. And so I really just learned what it meant to hold a space in a way where people can show up as themselves, feel affirmed as themselves. And I think that once you encounter that feeling, it's hard to get it out of you. And for so many reasons, we're always told that who we are, how we show up in the world is not enough. And so when we encounter those little moments where it's like, oh, I get to show up here and nobody's gonna say this or nobody's gonna say that, I think that's more, I've taken that as a practice of creating liberated spaces, whether the workshops are in person, online, and yeah, giving people that gift of knowing that people affirm them and that a person sees them and seeing them as being meaningful contributors to making the world better. I mean, I just call it out, because I think people with positional power within the world and systems we all live under, they're socialized just to be the way that they are. And, nobody questions it, because we're all taught that, white people can assert their dominance and that that's okay because that's the way the world is. And I think a lot of times people can go to the default, whether that's a straight person, heterosexual person, saying stuff about queer people, gender non. So there's all these ways that we have these defaults. And so for me, just calling it out and, naming that this is going to be a liberated space, that we are going to be anti-racist and anti-oppressive in the ways that we are together. And I always try to create group agreements. So how are we going to be together? And that's becoming more and more a common practice these days that I'm seeing, both in the spaces that I'm in as a participant. And so literally just setting the tone of the space that you're trying to create from the beginning. And then just when things come up, because they always do, whether it's around, queerness or, insert thing, right? Just call it out and say, remember the group agreements. Remember that we all committed to showing up in this space in this way. And I think that begins to break down some of those things. And hopefully, I don't know, but I hope and pray that it has impact outside of the space, when they start to revert back to the default or the ways that we're taught to be in these oppressive systems. I hope that they can remember me saying, you know, remember we agreed to this, and that those things can kind of come to mind and have a ripple effect outside of the space. And again, you never know, but I hope. I just think it's something you have to get comfortable with, because in my intern days, I would rely on Alandria or other staff people who may be around the space to kind of be like, no. And I was challenged to like step up and speak up, you know, when I see things. And again, I feel like that's how we should be outside of spaces, right? If we hear someone demeaning trans children or trans people or queer people, I feel like people should stand up and defend them, right? And support their freedom and liberation to be who they are. And so I would say that I wasn't comfortable at first, but I also know the harm that can be caused in spaces when we allow things to continue. And so that's again why I think it's just better to call it out, because then if you set the container right, you can put it on how we agreed to be with each other. Mm-hmm. And so it becomes less about an attack of the person and just reminding them, you agreed to this by your being here. We made these agreements collectively. We all had a say. We all said that they were good enough. And that makes it about the collective again and not the individual.